The craziest part wasn't that my neighbor tried to blame me for the damage. It was that he actually convinced himself the story was true. By the time we ended up in court, he was so committed to the lie that he walked in smiling, like he was about to collect a prize instead of explain a fantasy. Looking back now, I can laugh about it. But when it started, standing on my front porch in the middle of one of the worst snowstorms our town had seen in years, I honestly had no idea how close I was to becoming the villain in someone else's made-up story. This happened in a small town outside Grand Rapids, Michigan. The kind of place where people wave when they pass each other, where everyone knows which house hands out the good candy on Halloween, and where neighborhood gossip somehow travels faster than the internet. I'd lived there for almost 8 years. Quiet life. Quiet street. I worked remotely as a project coordinator for a manufacturing company, spent most of my days at home, and generally stayed out of everyone's business. My neighbor across the street, though, was a different story. His name was Randall Pierce. Randall wasn't exactly a bad guy, at least not in the beginning. He was one of those retired men who suddenly had too much time and nowhere useful to put it. At first, that energy went into harmless things. Measuring his lawn, washing his truck twice a week, organizing community cleanup days nobody asked for. But over the years something shifted. He became obsessed with control. Not his property, everyone's property. If a trash can sat by the curb an extra day, Randall noticed. If somebody parked a little too close to a mailbox, Randall noticed. If a kid rode a dirt bike through an empty lot half a mile away, somehow Randall still noticed. And if Randall noticed something, eventually everybody heard about it. My interactions with him were usually polite but cautious. I'd learned pretty quickly that disagreeing with him was like arguing with a brick wall that somehow had opinions. A few months before everything happened, he had gotten into an argument with another neighbor over a basketball hoop that was apparently 6 inches too close to a property line. That disagreement lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Over 6 inches. So when winter arrived and the forecast started warning us about a major snow event, I figured the biggest challenge would be digging my driveway out afterward. I had no idea Randall would somehow turn a snowstorm into a legal battle. The storm rolled in on a Friday evening. By midnight, visibility had practically disappeared. Snow hammered the windows all night long. The wind sounded like it was trying to tear pieces off the house. Every few hours I'd wake up, peek outside, and see the accumulation getting deeper. By morning, the entire neighborhood looked like someone had erased it and redrawn everything in white. Cars were buried. Mailboxes were buried. Even the sidewalks had vanished. I made coffee, settled near the front window, and watched the city plows begin their slow march through town. There was something strangely peaceful about it. Huge orange trucks crawling through the snowfall, clearing paths through what looked like an Arctic wasteland. Since I worked from home, I had nowhere to go. My SUV sat untouched in my driveway beneath nearly 2 feet of snow. You couldn't have driven it if you wanted to. The tires weren't even visible anymore. Around 10 that morning, while I was answering emails and enjoying the rare excuse to stay inside all day, somebody started pounding on my front door. Not knocking. Pounding. The kind of pounding that instantly tells you whoever is outside is already angry. I opened the door and found Randall standing there. His face was red. His shoulders were tense. Snow dusted his coat and gloves. In one hand, he held a stack of printed photographs. Before I could even say good morning, he shoved one of them toward me. "You see this?" he snapped. I looked down. The photo showed a damaged section of curb near his driveway. The concrete was chipped. A strip of frozen grass nearby looked torn up. Fresh tracks cut through the snow. I stared at the picture, then looked back at him. "Okay." He jabbed a finger toward the image. "Your vehicle caused this." For a second I honestly thought he was joking. "My vehicle? Don't play dumb." His voice got louder. "You parked too close to the curb. The plow had to swing wide. Now my property is damaged." I blinked. Then I looked past him toward my driveway where my SUV sat under what basically looked like a small glacier. "Randall, my car hasn't moved in 2 days. That's not what these photos show. My car is literally buried in snow." "I already called the city," he interrupted. "I gave them your plate number. That got my attention." "You what?" "You're responsible. The repairs will probably run around $1,800. There was this weird moment where I genuinely couldn't decide whether I should laugh or get angry. The accusation was so absurd it felt impossible to take seriously. Every visible piece of evidence contradicted him. My driveway showed no tire tracks leading out. The SUV was completely covered. Anybody with functioning eyesight could see it hadn't gone anywhere. But Randall wasn't interested in reality. He had built a theory, and now he needed someone to blame. "I'm not paying for damage I didn't cause," I said. He stared at me for a long second, lips pressed together. Then he pointed toward me like a prosecutor delivering a final warning. "We'll see what the city says." And with that, he turned and stomped away through the snow. I stood there watching him disappear across the street, wondering what in the world had just happened. At the time, I thought that would be the end of it. A ridiculous misunderstanding. Maybe a bad day mixed with cabin fever and too much snow. I figured eventually somebody would explain the obvious facts and Randall would quietly move on. What I didn't know was that over the next few days, he would double down on the accusation, start telling neighbors his version of events, and eventually take things so far that even a judge would end up questioning whether he had knowingly filed a false claim. And the moment I opened my mailbox a week later, I realized this wasn't going away. The following Wednesday started like any other day. I grabbed the mail on my way back from clearing the last stubborn ridge of snow at the end of my driveway, and tucked between a grocery flyer and a utility bill was a thick manila envelope. The return address belonged to the county small claims court. The second I saw it, my stomach sank. I already knew who it was from before I even opened it. Sure enough, inside was a formal civil claim filed by Randall Pierce. He wasn't bluffing. He wasn't trying to scare me. He had actually taken the time to fill out paperwork, gather photographs, calculate damages, and drag me into court over something I knew hadn't happened. I stood in my kitchen reading the complaint twice because the whole thing felt surreal. According to Randall, I had parked my vehicle in a negligent manner during the storm, forcing a city snowplow to alter its route and damage his curb, landscaping, and driveway edge. The amount he was demanding was $1, $842.67. Such a weirdly specific number that it almost made me laugh. And honestly, I did laugh. For about 30 seconds. Then reality kicked in. Even ridiculous lawsuits require responses. So that afternoon, I called an attorney named Melissa Hartman. Melissa had helped me with a contract dispute years earlier and was one of those people who never seemed impressed by drama. The more outrageous a situation became, the calmer she got. When I finished explaining everything, there was silence on the phone for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me your vehicle was actually in the driveway during the storm." "Still is." "Good. That's it." I asked, "That's your reaction?" She chuckled. "Jake, I've practiced law for 15 years. When somebody's story starts falling apart in the first 5 minutes, I don't panic." A few days later, I met her in her office and brought copies of everything Randall had filed. We spread the photos across a conference table. Melissa studied each image carefully. At first, she didn't say much. Then she picked up one photograph and narrowed her eyes. "That's interesting." "What?" She slid the photo toward me. It showed the damaged curb and the snow tracks Randall claimed belonged to my SUV. "Look past the damage." I leaned closer. "The tracks." "Exactly." I stared for a few seconds before it clicked. The marks didn't stop near Randall's property. They continued down the street, farther than I had noticed before. Melissa nodded. "If these are supposedly your vehicle tracks, why do they continue another several hundred yards?" I hadn't even thought about that. Randall's entire claim depended on the idea that my SUV somehow created those marks. But the tracks stretched well beyond his driveway. It was such an obvious problem that I couldn't believe nobody had pointed it out earlier. Melissa smiled. "People get emotionally attached to their theories. Once that happens, evidence becomes optional." Over the next couple of weeks, we started preparing for court. And that's when things got even stranger. Apparently, Randall wasn't content with filing a lawsuit. He had also been talking to anyone who would listen. One afternoon, I ran into my neighbor Linda while checking my mailbox. She hesitated before speaking. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Did you really hit Randall's property?" I almost laughed. "No." She looked relieved. "That's what I thought." Then she lowered her voice. "He's been telling people you admitted it." I stared at her. What?" "He's saying you told him you parked too close to the curb." I couldn't help shaking my head. It was becoming obvious that Randall wasn't simply mistaken anymore. He was actively rewriting events. Every week seemed to add another version of the story. According to one neighbor, I had apologized. According to another, I was secretly negotiating with the city. Somebody else heard I had a history of damaging property. None of it was true. It felt like watching a snowball roll downhill. gathering more nonsense with every rotation. For a while I was angry. Really angry. Not because of the money. $1,800 wasn't life-changing. What bothered me was being falsely accused by someone who seemed perfectly comfortable damaging my reputation just to protect his own ego. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this probably wasn't about the curb at all. Randall had spent years positioning himself as the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood. He always needed to be right. He always needed to be the authority. And if the damage had actually been caused by something outside his control, then he couldn't play the role of investigator, victim, and hero all at once. Blaming me solved that problem. Fortunately, Melissa had another idea. During one of our meetings she asked, "Do you know how modern snowplows operate?" I shrugged. "They push snow." She laughed. "Most city fleets track everything." That was news to me. She explained that municipal plows often carried GPS systems, operational logs, route records, and dashboard cameras. Every movement was documented. Every route was stored. Every shift was recorded. Suddenly the case became much more interesting. Melissa filed requests for city maintenance records related to the storm. A week later the responses started arriving. First came route documentation, then vehicle logs, then GPS records, and finally, the piece that changed everything: dash camera footage. I still remember sitting in Melissa's office the first time we watched it. The video showed one of the city's plows moving slowly through our neighborhood in the middle of the night. Snow blasted across the windshield. Streetlights glowed through the storm like distant lanterns. The timestamp read 2:57 a.m. The truck crawled down our street exactly as expected. Then, as it approached Randall's property, something happened. The plow blade struck a frozen manhole cover hidden beneath packed snow. The impact jolted the blade sideways. Sparks flashed. The truck shifted slightly. The edge of the blade scraped directly along the curb in front of Randall's house. Melissa paused the video. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then she looked at me and grinned. "Well," I said, "that seems important. Extremely important." We rewound the footage several times. There was no ambiguity. No room for interpretation. The city plow had caused the damage. Not my SUV. Not some mysterious driver. Not negligence. Just an unfortunate accident during a major snowstorm. But the best part wasn't even the curb damage. As the video continued, another detail became visible. My house appeared on screen. My driveway sat covered in untouched snow. My SUV was exactly where I said it had been. Completely buried. Completely stationary. The evidence didn't just weaken Randall's claim. It obliterated it. I assumed that once we shared the footage, the lawsuit would disappear. Any reasonable person would look at that video and immediately withdraw the complaint. Randall was not a reasonable person. Melissa sent copies of the relevant findings. He refused to back down. We offered him multiple opportunities to dismiss the case voluntarily. He ignored every one of them. At that point, I stopped feeling frustrated and started feeling fascinated. It was like watching someone drive straight toward a brick wall after being shown a map, a warning sign, and an aerial photograph. The hearing date finally arrived in early spring. Snow still lingered in shaded areas around town, though most of it had melted. That morning I put on a suit, grabbed my folder of documents, and drove to the courthouse with Melissa. As we walked inside, she seemed completely relaxed. I, on the other hand, was nervous despite knowing the facts were on my side. There's something unsettling about sitting in a courtroom while another person accuses you of wrongdoing, even when you know they're wrong. We entered the hearing room and found seats near the front. A few minutes later Randall arrived. The confidence radiating off that man was almost impressive. He carried the same stack of photographs I'd seen on my porch months earlier. He nodded to a couple people in the room as though he were attending an awards ceremony. Then he looked directly at me and smirked. That smirk stayed on his face right up until the hearing began. What happened next would become one of the most satisfying moments of my entire life. Because within less than 20 minutes, every version of Randall's story was about to collapse under the weight of a single question and one piece of video evidence he never saw coming. The hearing started with Randall doing exactly what I expected him to do. He walked to the front of the room, carrying those photographs like they were sacred evidence, and launched into a polished version of the story he had apparently been telling around town for months. Listening to him was honestly fascinating. If I hadn't lived through the actual events, I might have believed him myself. He spoke with complete confidence, describing how my vehicle had supposedly been parked near the curb, how the snowplow had allegedly been forced to maneuver around it, and how that decision had supposedly caused the damage to his property. Every sentence sounded rehearsed. Every detail sounded certain. The judge listened patiently while taking notes. Then Randall held up one of the photographs and pointed toward me. "The tire tracks are visible right there," he said. "You can clearly see what happened." He looked pleased with himself, almost proud. When he finally finished speaking, the judge turned toward our table. Melissa stood slowly, adjusted a folder in front of her, and thanked Randall for his detailed explanation. Then she asked one simple question. "Mr. Pierce, if those tracks belong to my client's vehicle, can you explain why they continue uninterrupted for nearly half a block beyond your property?" The room went quiet. Completely quiet. Randall blinked. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He looked down at the photograph, back at Melissa, then back at the photograph again. For the first time all morning, he looked uncertain. "Well," he started. And then nothing. No explanation came. Because there wasn't one. Melissa didn't press him. She didn't need to. The silence was doing the work for her. After a few seconds, she calmly moved to the next item. "Your Honor, we'd like to present city maintenance records, GPS logs, and dash camera footage from the snowplow operating on the street during the storm." The judge nodded. A monitor near the front of the room flickered on. Suddenly, everyone was watching the same video Melissa and I had reviewed weeks earlier. The footage showed the storm in all its chaos. Wind, snow, limited visibility. The plow moving carefully down our street in the middle of the night. Then came the moment. The blade struck the frozen manhole cover hidden beneath the snowpack. The impact jolted the equipment sideways. The curb in front of Randall's house appeared on screen. The scrape was visible. The damage was visible. The cause was visible. Nobody had to speculate because the camera had recorded everything. The video continued. A few seconds later my property came into view. There sat my SUV, buried beneath fresh snow exactly where I said it had been. No recent tire marks. No movement. No evidence supporting Randall's accusation whatsoever. Just a snow-covered vehicle sitting peacefully in a driveway while the storm raged around it. The judge leaned back in her chair and watched the final seconds of the footage. Then she looked at Randall. I don't think I've ever seen someone's confidence disappear so quickly. The smirk was gone. The certainty was gone. Even his posture changed. It was like watching air escape from a balloon. Finally the judge spoke. Case dismissed. Just like that. 4 months of accusations, gossip, paperwork, and nonsense ended in 2 words. But she wasn't finished. She turned directly toward Randall and folded her hands. "Mr. Pierce, you are fortunate this court is limiting its decision to dismissal." Randall swallowed hard. The judge continued. "The evidence presented today directly contradicts the allegations in your filing. I strongly suggest you exercise greater care before making accusations against your neighbors in the future." The color drained from his face, then somehow came rushing back, even darker than before. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. As for me, I just sat there, not celebrating, not laughing, just feeling an enormous sense of relief. Sometimes people imagine victory feels explosive. In reality, it often feels quiet, like finally putting down a weight you didn't ask to carry. Outside the courthouse, Melissa shook my hand and smiled. "You handled it well." "Honestly," I said, "I still can't believe we were here at all." She laughed. "You'd be surprised what pride can convince people to do." That turned out to be one of the smartest things anyone said during the entire ordeal. Because pride was exactly what had caused this mess. A damaged curb wasn't the real issue. Being wrong was. Over the following weeks, the city repaired the curb at no cost to Randall. Their own equipment had caused the damage, and they handled it accordingly. A repair crew arrived one morning, patched the concrete, restored the area, and moved on. One of the workers recognized the address and casually mentioned hearing about the court case. He just shook his head and laughed. Apparently the story had traveled farther than I realized. As for Randall, something changed after that hearing. The man who used to monitor every trash can and comment on every parked vehicle suddenly became very quiet. He stopped wandering the neighborhood looking for problems. He stopped lecturing people. He stopped offering unsolicited opinions about everyone else's property. In fact, for months afterward, he avoided eye contact whenever we crossed paths. We never had a dramatic confrontation. No apology ever came. No admission. No explanation. Just silence. And maybe that was the closest thing to accountability he was willing to offer. A few days after the city completed the repairs, I received a copy of the final maintenance invoice through a public records request Melissa had suggested. The amount billed to the homeowner was exactly $0. I couldn't resist. I made a photocopy, slipped it into an envelope, and mailed it to Randall with no note attached. Just the invoice. Nothing else. Maybe it was petty. Maybe it wasn't. I'll let you decide. What I do know is that I never heard another word about that curb. Looking back, the whole experience taught me something important. Facts matter. Evidence matters. But neither of those things can help if people stop caring about the truth. Once pride takes over, some people would rather defend a bad story than admit a simple mistake. Thankfully, cameras don't care about pride. GPS logs don't care about ego. And judges tend to appreciate evidence more than assumptions. So now I'm curious what you think. Was Randall simply embarrassed and too stubborn to back down? Or do you think he knowingly pushed a false story, hoping nobody would challenge him? And if you were in my position, would you have mailed that $0 invoice after the case was over? Or would you have let it go? Let me know down in the comments, because I have a feeling people are going to be divided on this one.